What if I told you that the first 5 minutes of your morning determine whether you'll conquer the day or let it conquer you? Most people wake up and immediately check their phones, scroll through social media, or dive straight into stress without realizing they just handed their power away before their feet even hit the floor. But the ancient Stoics knew something we've forgotten. They understood that how you speak to yourself in those crucial morning moments sets the tone for everything that follows. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in Rome, didn't start his day by checking messages from senators or worrying about empire politics. He spoke to himself. He reminded himself of fundamental truths. He prepared his mind for whatever chaos the world might throw at him. And that preparation, that mental armor he built each morning, is what kept him grounded when everything around him was falling apart. Today we're diving deep into 10 powerful Stoic phrases that will transform your mornings from moments of weakness into moments of strength. These aren't just pretty words or motivational fluff. These are battle-tested truths that have guided emperors, philosophers, and warriors through the hardest moments of human history, and they're about to guide you through yours. Before we begin, I need you to understand something critical. This isn't a video you watch passively. This is your daily training ground. Each phrase we cover is a weapon in your mental arsenal, a tool to build the kind of unshakable mindset that separates the strong from the struggling. If you're serious about changing your life, like this video right now, drop a comment when a phrase hits you hard. And most importantly, don't skip any part, because missing even one of these truths could cost you the clarity you need when life tests you. Let's begin. Number 1. Today I will focus on what I can control and release what I cannot. The moment you wake up, your mind wants to race. It wants to worry about traffic, stress about meetings, replay yesterday's mistakes, or predict tomorrow's problems. But here's the brutal truth about that mental chaos. 90% of what you're worried about is completely outside your control. And the 10% that is within your control, that's where your power lives. Epictetus taught us that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. When you start your morning by reminding yourself of this simple boundary between what you control and what you don't, you reclaim your energy. You stop bleeding mental strength into places where it can't make a difference. Think about yesterday. How much time did you spend frustrated by other people's choices? How much energy did you waste trying to control outcomes that were never yours to control in the first place? How often did you let external circumstances dictate your internal state? That's not strength. That's surrender disguised as effort. But when you wake up and immediately establish this boundary, something powerful happens. You become selective with your attention. You become strategic with your energy. You stop being a victim of circumstances and start being an architect of your response. The weather doesn't control your mood. Other people's opinions don't control your worth. The economy doesn't control your effort. Traffic doesn't control your peace. You control your thoughts, your choices, your actions, your responses. That's it. But that's everything. Because when you master those 4 things, when you truly own them, you become unstoppable, not because nothing can touch you, but because nothing can break you. Start tomorrow morning by saying this phrase out loud. Feel the weight of it. Feel the freedom in it. Because the person who truly understands what they control and what they don't becomes dangerous in the best possible way. They become calm in chaos, focused in confusion, and steady when everyone else is shaken. Number 2. I choose my response to whatever today brings. Here's something most people never realize. Between every event and your reaction to it, there's a space, a moment of choice, a split second where you get to decide who you're going to be. Most people live their entire lives without ever noticing that space, let alone using it. They react automatically, emotionally, unconsciously. Someone cuts them off in traffic and they explode. A meeting gets canceled and they spiral. A comment hurts their feelings and they crumble. But the Stoic sees that space. The Stoic lives in that space. The Stoic owns that space. Because in that space lies the difference between being controlled by life and controlling your response to life. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, said everything can be taken from a person, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Think about that. Even in the most extreme suffering, in the most impossible conditions, the power to choose your response remains yours. No one can take that from you unless you give it away. When you start your morning with this reminder, you're not saying that everything will go perfectly. You're not pretending that life won't be difficult or painful or unfair. You're saying something far more powerful. You're saying that no matter what happens, you get to choose what it means. You get to choose how you respond. You get to choose who you become because of it. Someone disrespects you today. You choose whether that makes you angry or stronger. A plan falls through. You choose whether that makes you bitter or adaptable. You face rejection. You choose whether that makes you quit or more determined. Life isn't asking for your permission to be challenging, but you always get to choose what your response will be. This isn't about being emotionless. This isn't about pretending pain doesn't hurt or disappointment doesn't sting. This is about recognizing that your response, your choice, your decision about what comes next, that's always yours, always. And when you start each day remembering that truth, you walk into the world differently. You stand differently. You breathe differently. Because you know that whatever happens, you'll handle it. Not because it will be easy, but because choosing your response is your superpower. Number 3, my worth is not determined by external outcomes. Let's get brutally honest about something. Most of us wake up every morning and immediately start measuring our value by things that have nothing to do with who we are. We check how many likes we got overnight. We worry about what people will think of our presentation. We stress about whether we'll get promoted, accepted, approved, or applauded. We've turned our self-worth into a stock market that goes up and down based on other people's opinions and external circumstances. But here's what the Stoics knew that we've forgotten. Your worth isn't determined by your performance. It's not measured by your achievements. It's not calculated by your bank account, your followers, your job title, or how many people understand you. Your worth is intrinsic. It exists because you exist. It's not something you earn. It's something you are. Marcus Aurelius was literally the most powerful person in the known world, but he didn't derive his worth from his title. He knew that his value as a human being had nothing to do with being emperor and everything to do with how he lived his principles. When you tie your worth to external outcomes, you become a slave to forces you can't control. Every rejection becomes a judgment on your value. Every failure becomes evidence of your inadequacy. Every setback becomes proof that you're not enough. But when you start your day remembering that your worth is internal, stable, and unshakable, everything changes. You can pursue goals without being desperate. You can face rejection without being destroyed. You can experience failure without losing your identity. You can receive criticism without crumbling because you know that none of these external things define who you are. This doesn't mean you stop trying. This doesn't mean you stop caring about results or improvement or growth. This means you pursue these things from a place of strength, not desperation. You work hard because you choose to, not because you have to prove something. You take risks because you want to grow, not because you need validation. The person who knows their worth doesn't need constant reassurance. They don't need every project to succeed to feel valuable. They don't need every relationship to work out to feel lovable. They don't need every day to be perfect to feel worthy. They wake up knowing that their value exists independent of what happens to them, and that knowledge makes them powerful in ways that external success never could. Number 4, discomfort is my teacher, not my enemy. Most people spend their entire lives running from discomfort. They avoid difficult conversations. They stay in safe jobs they hate. They choose familiar misery over uncertain growth. They see discomfort as a signal that something is wrong, that they need to escape, that they're on the wrong path. But the Stoics saw discomfort differently. They saw it as a teacher, a trainer, a necessary part of becoming who they were meant to become. When you wake up and remind yourself that discomfort is your teacher, you change your relationship with challenge completely. That difficult conversation you've been avoiding, that's not torture, that's training. That project that scares you, that's not a threat, that's growth. That workout when you don't feel like it, that's not punishment, that's preparation. Seneca used to practice voluntary discomfort. He would sleep on the floor, eat simple food, wear old clothes, not because he hated comfort, but because he wanted to be ready for whatever life might take away. He wanted to train himself to be strong regardless of circumstances. He wanted to build the kind of resilience that couldn't be shaken by external changes. Every time you choose the comfortable option over the right option, you make yourself weaker. Every time you avoid discomfort, you avoid growth. Every time you run from what's difficult, you rob yourself of the chance to become stronger, smarter, more capable. But when you start your morning remembering that discomfort is your friend, that challenge is your gym, that difficulty is your teacher, you stop running from the very things that could transform you. This shift in perspective is massive. Instead of asking, how can I avoid this discomfort? You start asking, what is this discomfort trying to teach me? Instead of seeing obstacles as problems, you see them as opportunities to practice your strength. Instead of viewing challenges as unfair, you view them as necessary for your development. The strongest people you know didn't become strong by avoiding difficulty. They became strong by walking through it, learning from it, and choosing it when necessary. When you embrace discomfort as your teacher, you become the kind of person who doesn't just survive life's challenges. You thrive because of them. Number 5, I will act according to my values, not my emotions. Here's a truth that will either liberate you or terrify you. Your emotions are not you. They're signals, messengers, temporary visitors in your consciousness. But most people treat their emotions like absolute truth, like commandments they must obey. They feel angry, so they act angry. They feel scared, so they avoid risk. They feel lazy, so they skip their commitments. They've made their emotions the CEO of their life, instead of understanding that emotions are just information. When you start your morning by committing to act according to your values rather than your emotions, you take back control of your life in a profound way. You stop being a puppet, controlled by whatever feeling happens to be strongest at the moment. You become someone who can feel fear and still act with courage, someone who can feel anger and still respond with wisdom, someone who can feel sadness and still show up with strength. Your values are your true north. They're the principles you've chosen to live by when your mind is clear and your perspective is wide. Integrity, courage, compassion, discipline, honesty, growth. These don't change based on your mood or circumstances. These are the constants that guide you when emotions are pulling you in a dozen different directions. But here's what most people miss. Acting according to your values when you don't feel like it is exactly when values matter most. Anyone can be honest when it's easy. Anyone can be courageous when they're not afraid. Anyone can be disciplined when they're motivated. But the person who acts with integrity when it's costly, with courage when they're terrified, with discipline when they're exhausted, that person is building something unbreakable. This doesn't mean you ignore your emotions or pretend they don't exist. This means you acknowledge them, learn from them, and then choose your actions based on who you want to be, not how you happen to feel. Because feelings are temporary, but character is permanent. Emotions fluctuate, but values endure. And when you consistently choose values over emotions, you become the kind of person who can be trusted, especially by yourself. Number 6. This moment is all I truly have. Right now, as you read these words, your mind is probably somewhere else. It's replaying yesterday's conversation, planning this afternoon's tasks, or worrying about next week's deadline. But here's the reality that most people never fully grasp. Yesterday is gone forever. Tomorrow doesn't exist yet. The only moment you actually possess, the only moment where you have any real power, is this one, right here, right now. The Stoics called this present moment awareness, and they understood it wasn't just philosophy. It was survival. When you're constantly living in the past or future, you're not really living at all. Your existing about tomorrow steals your strength in a mental prison where your anxiety for today and your regrets about yesterday blind you to the opportunities right in front of you. When you start your morning by anchoring yourself in the present moment, something remarkable happens. Your mind stops scattering its energy across time zones it can't control and focuses that power on the one place where it can actually make a difference. Here, now, this breath, this choice, this action. Think about the last time you were completely present. Maybe you were in nature, or having a deep conversation, or doing something you loved so much that time seemed to disappear. In that moment, were you anxious about the future? Were you tormented by past mistakes? Of course not. You were alive in the truest sense, fully engaged with reality as it actually exists, rather than as your mind imagines it should be. But presence isn't just about peace. It's about power. When you're fully present, you see opportunities that scattered attention misses. You make decisions from clarity rather than confusion. You respond to what's actually happening rather than reacting to what you think might happen. You become dangerous in the best possible way because you're operating from reality, not from the stories your mind tells about reality. The person who masters the present moment becomes unshakable because they're not fighting battles that don't exist yet, or trying to change outcomes that are already finished. They're putting all their strength, all their attention, all their intelligence into the one moment where they actually have influence. And that focused power is unstoppable. This morning, when you say these words, feel your feet on the ground. Notice your breath moving in and out. Acknowledge that this moment, imperfect as it might be, is your life. Not tomorrow's possibilities or yesterday's regrets, but this breath, this heartbeat, this choice. Because when you truly own the present moment, you own everything that actually matters. Number 7. I am responsible for my thoughts, words, and actions. Here's one of the hardest truths you'll ever have to swallow. No one is coming to save you. No one is going to fix your problems, heal your wounds, or create the life you want. That's not their job. It's yours. And until you accept complete responsibility for your thoughts, words, and actions, you'll remain powerless, waiting for someone else to change what only you can change. Most people live their entire lives as victims of circumstances they refuse to take responsibility for. They blame their childhood for their current choices. They blame their boss for their career stagnation. They blame their partner for their relationship problems. They blame the economy, the government, their genetics, their luck, anything and anyone except the one person who actually has the power to change their situation, themselves. But responsibility isn't a burden. It's liberation. Because the moment you accept that you are the author of your life, you reclaim the power to rewrite your story. The moment you stop blaming others for your circumstances, you stop giving them control over your future. The moment you own your choices completely, you become free to make different ones. This doesn't mean everything that happens to you is your fault. Life is unfair. People will hurt you. Circumstances beyond your control will challenge you. But even then, especially then, you are responsible for your response. You are responsible for what you do with what happens to you. You are responsible for who you become because of it. When you start your morning by accepting this complete responsibility, you step into a different kind of power. You stop wasting energy on blame and start investing it in change. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What am I going to do about it?" You stop being a victim of your story and start being the hero of it. The person who takes complete responsibility becomes incredibly attractive because they're not looking for someone to blame or someone to save them. They're looking for ways to grow, to contribute, to make things better. They don't drain energy from others with complaints and excuses. They generate energy with solutions and action. This level of responsibility is terrifying because it means you can't hide anymore. You can't pretend that your life is the way it is because of forces beyond your control. But it's also exhilarating because it means you have more power than you ever imagined. The power to think differently, speak differently, act differently, and therefore live differently. Number 8. Obstacles are opportunities to practice virtue. Life is going to hit you today. Maybe not with a devastating blow, but with something. A delayed train, a difficult client, a technology failure, a misunderstanding, a disappointment. And when it does, you have two choices. You can see it as an attack on your peace, an unfair interruption to your plans, a reason to complain or give up. Or you can see it as exactly what it is, a chance to practice who you want to become. The Stoics had a radical perspective on obstacles. They didn't see them as problems to avoid, but as training equipment for the soul. Every challenge was a chance to practice patience. Every setback was an opportunity to develop resilience. Every conflict was a moment to choose wisdom over reaction. Every difficulty was a test of character that could either strengthen them or reveal where they still needed to grow. When you wake up expecting obstacles and viewing them as opportunities, you transform your relationship with difficulty completely. That you off in traffic, the person who cuts, just gave you a chance to practice patience. That project that's harder than expected, it's giving you an opportunity to develop perseverance. That criticism that stings, it's offering you a moment to choose growth over defensiveness. This shift in perspective it means nothing can truly defeat you. Every life-changing because experience, good or bad, becomes useful for your development. You stop being someone who life happens to and start being someone who uses life as raw material for becoming stronger, wiser, more compassionate. But here's the key. This isn't about pretending obstacles don't hurt or that disappointment doesn't sting. It's about recognizing that pain can be purposeful, that struggle can strengthen, that what breaks you can also make you. The obstacle isn't just in the way. The obstacle is the way forward to becoming who you're meant to become. The strongest people you know didn't avoid obstacles. They collected them. They used every challenge as a chance to practice their values under pressure. They turned their wounds into wisdom and their struggles into strength. And when you start your morning with this mindset, you become hungry for challenge because you understand that challenge is how character is forged. Number 9, I will speak truthfully and act with integrity. In a world where lies are easy and truth is costly, where image matters more than reality and perception trumps substance, the decision to speak truthfully and act with integrity is radical. It's also one of the most powerful choices you can make. Because when you commit to truth and integrity, you build something that can never be taken from you. You build a reputation with yourself. Most people compromise their integrity in small ways every day. They say they're fine when they're not. They agree to things they don't believe in. They make promises they don't intend to keep. They present themselves as someone they're not on social media. They tell little lies to avoid difficult conversations. And each compromise makes the next one easier until they've built a life on a foundation of half-truths and hidden resentments. But when you start your morning by committing to truth and integrity, you make a different choice. You choose to align your words with your thoughts, your actions with your values, your public self with your private self. You choose to be the same person in every room, with every person, in every situation. You choose authenticity over approval. This isn't easy. Truth often costs more than lies in the short term. Integrity sometimes leads to conflict that dishonesty could avoid. Speaking honestly means risking rejection. Acting with integrity might mean losing opportunities that compromise could provide. But here's what most people don't understand. The price of integrity is paid once. The price of dishonesty is paid forever. Paid. When you live with truth and integrity, you sleep peacefully because you have nothing to hide. You speak confidently because you have nothing to defend. You act boldly because you have nothing to fear being discovered. You build relationships based on reality rather than illusion, which means they're strong enough to withstand difficulty. The person who commits to truth and integrity becomes magnetic because authenticity is rare. People are starving for genuine connection with someone who says what they mean and means what they say. Someone whose words can be trusted and whose actions align with their stated values. Someone who doesn't say one thing and do another. This morning, when you commit to truth and integrity, you're not just making a decision about how you'll behave today. You're making a decision about who you'll become over time. Because every truthful word and every act of integrity builds the kind of character that can withstand any storm and earn the respect of anyone worth respecting, including yourself. Number 10. I will end this day better than I began it. Here's the ultimate test of whether you're truly living or just existing. Can you look back at the end of today and honestly say you're better than you were this morning? Not perfect, not without mistakes, not without struggles, but better, stronger, wiser, more aligned with who you want to become. Most people end each day exactly where they started, sometimes worse. They consume more than they create. They complain more than they contribute. They react more than they respond. They drift through their hours without intention, without growth, without any real sense of progress or purpose. Days become weeks, weeks become months, and months become years of standing still while pretending to move forward. But when you start your morning with the commitment to end the day better than you began it, everything changes. Every choice becomes meaningful because it either moves you forward or holds you back. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to practice compassion. Every challenge becomes a chance to develop strength. Every moment becomes a building block in the construction of who you're becoming. This doesn't mean you have to achieve something monumental every day. It means you have to grow something inside yourself every day. Maybe today you're more patient with your family. Maybe today you keep a promise you would have broken before. Maybe today you choose the difficult right path instead of the easy wrong one. Maybe today you learn something new, forgive someone old, or take one small step toward a dream you've been postponing. Growth is often invisible in the moment, but undeniable over time. The person who commits to getting better every day doesn't just change their trajectory, they change their identity. They become someone who grows instead of someone who stagnates, someone who learns instead of someone who repeats, someone who evolves instead of someone who settles. When you make this commitment every morning, you join a rare group of people who refuse to accept that today will be just like yesterday. You become someone who believes that change is possible, growth is available, and better is always an option. You become someone who doesn't just survive their days, but uses their days to become unstoppable. These 10 phrases aren't just morning mantras. They're declarations of war against mediocrity, weakness, and the victim mentality that keeps most people trapped in lives they don't love. When you speak these truths to yourself every morning, you're not just preparing for the day ahead. You're programming your mind for the life you want to build. But here's the thing about these phrases. They're not magic spells that work simply by being spoken. They're not wishful thinking disguised as wisdom. They're battle-tested principles that require something most people aren't willing to give. They require you to mean them. They require you to live them. They require you to choose them again and again, especially when you don't feel like it. Because the morning you wake up and don't want to say these words, that's exactly when you need them most. The day you feel too tired, too discouraged, too beaten down to remind yourself of these truths. That's the day they have the power to save you. The moment you think you don't need this mental armor, that's when life is about to test whether you've actually built it or just pretended to. Let's talk about what happens when you actually live these principles instead of just thinking about them. When you truly focus on what you can control, you stop being anxious about outcomes and start being excited about effort. When you genuinely choose your responses, you stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the author of your character. When you really understand that your worth isn't tied to external validation, you become free to take risks, to fail, to try again without your identity crumbling with every setback. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think Stoicism is about becoming emotionless, robotic, disconnected from life. But that's the opposite of what these morning phrases create. They create someone more alive, more present, more engaged with reality as it actually exists, rather than as their fears imagine it might be. When you wake up and remind yourself that discomfort is your teacher, you stop running from the very experiences that could transform you. You start seeking challenge instead of avoiding it. You become hungry for growth instead of comfortable with stagnation. You realize that every difficult conversation, every scary decision, every moment of uncertainty is exactly where your strength is built. When you commit to acting according to your values instead of your emotions, you don't become cold. You become consistent. You become trustworthy. You become someone others can count on because they know that your principles don't change based on your mood or convenience. You become someone you can count on, which might be the most important relationship you'll ever build. The phrase about living in the present moment isn't about ignoring the future or pretending the past doesn't matter. It's about recognizing that the only place you have any real power is right here, right now. Your past decisions brought you to this moment, but they don't control what you do next. Your future dreams give you direction, but they won't become reality without present action. Think about this. Every single moment you spend worrying about tomorrow is a moment stolen from today's possibilities. Every minute you spend replaying yesterday's mistakes is a minute not invested in today's opportunities. When you truly live in the present moment, you don't become short-sighted. You become laser-focused on the one place where your effort can actually make a difference and responsibility. That's not about carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. That's about recognizing that you carry the power to change your world in your hands. Every day you wake up, you get to choose who you'll be, not based on who you were yesterday, not based on what others expect, but based on who you decide to become in this moment. The obstacle as opportunity principle transforms everything because it means nothing is wasted. Every disappointment teaches you resilience. Every rejection shows you that your worth isn't determined by others' acceptance. Every failure gives you data about what doesn't work and pushes you closer to what does. Every betrayal teaches you discernment. Every loss teaches you what truly matters. But here's what separates those who transform their lives with these principles from those who just collect them like inspirational quotes. Implementation. Daily, relentless, sometimes uncomfortable implementation, because knowing these truths, intellectually, is worthless. Living them practically is priceless. When you commit to ending each day better than you began it, you're not setting an impossible standard. You're creating a sustainable system for lifelong growth. Some days, better might mean you learned something new. Other days, it might mean you stayed calm in a situation that would have triggered you before. Sometimes it might mean you helped someone else, forgave someone who hurt you, or simply chose hope over cynicism when everything felt dark. The compound effect of getting slightly better every day is staggering. If you improve by just 1% each day, by the end of a year you're not just 1% better, you're 37 times better. That's not math. That's transformation. That's the difference between the person who drifts through life and the person who designs it. Now here's what I need you to understand. These aren't just phrases for good days. These aren't sunshine and rainbows wisdom for when everything is going your way. These are anchors for storms. These are tools for the hardest moments, the darkest days, the times when everything feels impossible and everyone seems against you. The morning you wake up to terrible news, these phrases ground you. The day you face your biggest fear, these truths strengthen you. The moment you want to give up on everything, these principles remind you who you really are underneath the pain, the disappointment, the exhaustion. Because here's what life doesn't tell you, but the Stoics knew from experience. The darkest moments often come right before the breakthrough. The hardest tests often come right before the promotion. The deepest pain often comes right before the profound growth. And if you quit when things get difficult, you'll never know what was waiting for you on the other side of that difficulty. These morning phrases aren't just about starting your day right. They're about building the kind of character that finishes what it starts. The kind of person who doesn't just dream about change, but creates it. The kind of human being who doesn't just survive life's challenges, but uses them as stepping stones to something greater. When you truly embrace these principles, something remarkable happens. You stop being afraid of life, not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger. You stop needing everything to go your way because you know you can handle it when things don't. You stop requiring perfect conditions to be happy because you learn to create inner peace regardless of outer chaos. And that transformation, that shift from weakness to strength, from victim to victor, from reactive to responsive, that's what makes you unstoppable. Not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can stop you from choosing who you become because of what hurts you. The person who wakes up every morning and speaks these truths to themselves becomes magnetic. People are drawn to that kind of inner strength. They want to be around someone who doesn't crumble under pressure, who doesn't blame others for their problems, who doesn't need constant reassurance to function. They want to follow someone who leads by example, who practices what they preach, who remains steady when everyone else is shaken. But the most important person you'll attract is your future self. The version of you that you're capable of becoming. The you that's been waiting for you to stop making excuses and start making progress. The you that's been patient while you learned these lessons the hard way. The you that's ready to emerge the moment you decide to stop talking about change and start living it. These 10 phrases are your daily invitation to become that person. Not someday, not when conditions are perfect, not when you feel ready. Today, this morning, right now. Because the gap between who you are and who you could become is bridged one choice at a time, one day at a time, one morning at a time. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, before you check your phone, before you start worrying about your to-do list, before you let the world tell you who you should be. Speak these truths to yourself. Mean them. Feel them. And then step into your day, not as someone life happens to, but as someone who happens to life. Because the difference between ordinary and extraordinary isn't talent, luck, or circumstances. It's the daily decision to choose strength over weakness, growth over comfort, truth over convenience. It's the morning ritual of preparing your mind for whatever the day might bring, and knowing that regardless of what comes, you'll handle it with dignity, wisdom, and unshakable inner strength. That's the foundation. That's the bedrock. But now we need to talk about what happens when you actually live these principles instead of just knowing them. Because there's a massive difference between intellectual understanding and embodied wisdom. There's a canyon between reading about strength and becoming strong. And that canyon is crossed not with one giant leap, but with thousands of small daily choices that compound into transformation. Here's what most people don't realize about these morning declarations. They're not positive thinking. They're not self-help mantras designed to make you feel better about a life you're not willing to change. They're marching orders. They're battle plans. They're the mental armor you put on before walking into a world that will test every single principle you claim to believe in. And that testing starts immediately. Within hours of speaking these truths to yourself, life will present you with opportunities to prove whether you meant them or just said them. Someone will disrespect you, and you'll get to choose whether you really believe your worth isn't determined by their opinion. A plan will fall through, and you'll discover whether you actually focus on what you can control or just talk about it. A difficult situation will arise, and you'll find out if you truly see obstacles as opportunities, or if that was just nice-sounding philosophy. This is where most people fail. They speak powerful words in the morning, and then abandon them by afternoon. They declare their commitment to growth, and then choose comfort at the first sign of discomfort. They promise to act with integrity, and then compromise their values when it becomes inconvenient. They claim to be responsible for their lives, and then blame others the moment something goes wrong. But the person who survives this testing, who actually lives these principles under pressure, who chooses the hard right over the easy wrong again and again, that person becomes something rare. They become unbreakable, not because they're made of steel, but because they're forged in fire. They become unstoppable, not because they never fall, but because they always get back up. Let me tell you what happens when you really commit to these morning truths, when you genuinely focus on what you can control. You stop being exhausted by things that were never your responsibility in the first place. You stop trying to manage other people's emotions, control their choices, or predict outcomes that depend on variables you can't influence. Instead, you pour all that recovered energy into the places where it can actually make a difference. Your effort becomes laser-focused. Your progress becomes undeniable. When you truly choose your response to whatever the day brings, you become dangerous in the best possible way. Dangerous to those who try to manipulate you with their reactions. Dangerous to circumstances that try to dictate your mood. Dangerous to the voice in your head that says you have no choice but to be angry, anxious, or defeated. You become someone who can walk through chaos and remain centered, who can face storms and stay grounded, who can encounter darkness and still choose light. And when you really understand that your worth isn't determined by external outcomes, you become free to take risks that terrify others. You can start that business because your identity doesn't depend on it succeeding. You can have that difficult conversation because your value doesn't hinge on their approval. You can pursue that dream because your worth isn't tied to whether you achieve it perfectly. You become someone who plays to win instead of playing not to lose. The transformation that happens when you embrace discomfort as your teacher is profound. You stop being someone life happens to, and start being someone who deliberately seeks experiences that will challenge and strengthen you. You don't wait for difficulty to find you. You go looking for it, not because you enjoy suffering, but because you understand that everything you want is on the other side of something you're currently avoiding. You start taking cold showers not because you like being cold, but because you want to practice doing things you don't want to do. You have difficult conversations not because you enjoy conflict, but because you know that's where honest relationships are built. You take on challenging projects not because they're easy, but because they'll force you to grow in ways that comfort never could. When you commit to acting according to your values instead of your emotions, you become predictable in the best possible way. People know they can count on you because your principles don't change based on your mood or circumstances. You become someone others seek out during difficult times because they know you won't crumble under pressure. You become a leader not because you demand to be followed, but because you demonstrate the kind of character others want to emulate. But here's what's really powerful about this. When you consistently choose values over emotions, you don't become emotionless. You become emotionally intelligent. You feel deeply, but you don't let those feelings drive your decisions. You experience anger without acting in anger. You feel fear without being paralyzed by fear. You encounter sadness without drowning in sadness. Your emotions become information instead of commands. Living in the present moment transforms everything because it's where all your power actually exists. You can't change yesterday no matter how much mental energy you spend replaying it. You can't control tomorrow no matter how much anxiety you invest in trying to predict it. But this moment, right now. This breath, this choice, this action, that's where transformation happens. When you really master presence, you stop missing your life while worrying about your life. You stop being so focused on getting somewhere that you forget to notice where you are. You stop being so busy planning happiness that you miss the opportunities for joy that exist right in front of you. You become fully alive instead of half present. The responsibility principle changes everything because it shifts you from victim to victor. When you truly accept responsibility for your thoughts, words, and actions, you reclaim power you didn't even realize you'd given away. Every complaint becomes a problem to solve. Every excuse becomes an opportunity to grow. Every blame becomes a mirror showing you where you still need to develop strength. This doesn't mean you caused everything that happened to you. This means you're responsible for what you do with everything that happened to you. You didn't choose to be hurt, but you choose whether that hurt makes you bitter or compassionate. You didn't choose to face obstacles, but you choose whether those obstacles defeat you or define your strength. When you see obstacles as opportunities to practice virtue, you become hungry for challenge instead of afraid of it. Every difficult person becomes a chance to practice patience. Every setback becomes an opportunity to develop resilience. Every failure becomes a teacher showing you what doesn't work, so you can discover what does. Every betrayal becomes a lesson in discernment. Every loss becomes a reminder of what truly matters. Speaking truthfully and acting with integrity creates a foundation that cannot be shaken. When your words align with your thoughts and your actions align with your values, you build credibility not just with others, but with yourself. You become someone whose promises mean something because you've proven that your word is reliable. You become someone who can look in the mirror without flinching because there's nothing hidden, nothing compromised, nothing to be ashamed of. But integrity is tested most when it costs you something. When telling the truth might lose you an opportunity. When doing the right thing might make you unpopular. When keeping your word might be inconvenient. Those are the moments that separate those who talk about integrity from those who live it. And the commitment to end each day better than you began, it creates a life of continuous growth instead of random drift. Every day becomes intentional. Every choice becomes meaningful. Every moment becomes an investment in the person you're becoming instead of just time you're passing. This doesn't mean you have to achieve something monumental every day. It means you have to learn something, practice something, or overcome something every day. Maybe today you're kinder to someone who frustrated you. Maybe today you keep a commitment you would have broken before. Maybe today you choose courage instead of comfort, truth instead of convenience, growth instead of stagnation. The compound effect of this daily improvement is staggering. Small changes repeated consistently create massive transformation over time. The person who gets 1% better every day doesn't just improve gradually. They transform completely. They become unrecognizable from who they were, not through dramatic overnight change, but through relentless daily evolution. Now here's what separates those who transform their lives with these principles from those who just think about them. Implementation. Daily, consistent, sometimes uncomfortable implementation. Because reading about strength doesn't make you strong. Thinking about courage doesn't make you brave. Talking about growth doesn't make you grow. Only action creates change. Only practice builds skill. Only consistency creates transformation. These morning phrases are your daily training regimen for the mind. Just like physical muscles need daily exercise to grow stronger, Mental muscles need daily practice to develop power, and just like physical training gets easier over time as you build strength, these mental practices become more natural as you build character. But here's the warning nobody wants to hear. There will be mornings when you don't want to say these words. There will be days when these truths feel impossible to believe. There will be moments when choosing strength feels harder than accepting weakness. Those are exactly the moments when these principles matter most. Those are the moments that separate those who transform from those who talk about transforming. Because anyone can be strong when they feel strong. Anyone can be positive when things are going well. Anyone can act with integrity when it doesn't cost them anything. But the person who speaks truth to themselves when they feel like lying, who chooses growth when they want comfort, who acts with courage when they're terrified, that person is building something unbreakable. The morning you wake up and don't feel like saying these words is the morning you need them most. The day you think you don't need this mental preparation is the day life is most likely to test whether you've actually built internal strength or just pretended to. The moment you feel too tired, too discouraged, or too defeated to remind yourself of these truths is precisely when they have the power to save you. This is why the Stoics practiced these principles not just when life was easy, but especially when it was hard. They understood that strength, unused, atrophies. Character untested remains theoretical. Values unpracticed are just pretty ideas. But principles lived under pressure become unshakable foundations for an extraordinary life. When you commit to these morning declarations, you're not just changing how you start your days. You're changing who you become over time. You're programming your mind for success instead of survival. You're training your character for leadership instead of followership. You're preparing your spirit for victory instead of defeat. And the beautiful part is, you don't need permission to start. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need anyone else to believe in these principles for them to work in your life. You just need to begin tomorrow morning, right when you wake up, before the world tells you who you should be, before your fears remind you of what might go wrong, before your doubts question whether change is possible. Speak these truths to yourself. Mean them. Feel them. And then step into your day, not as someone hoping things will get better, but as someone committed to becoming better regardless of what happens. Because that's what these phrases create. Not perfection, but progress. Not immunity from difficulty, but strength to handle whatever difficulty brings. Not a life without problems, but the power to turn every problem into an opportunity for growth. That's the foundation. That's where transformation begins. But let's dive deeper into what happens when these aren't just words you speak, but truths you embody. Because there's a massive difference between knowing these principles intellectually and living them when life gets ugly. And life will get ugly. Life will test every single one of these declarations with situations designed to break your resolve. Here's what most people don't understand about morning rituals like this. They think it's about starting the day with good vibes or positive energy. But that's not what this is. This is war preparation. This is mental conditioning for the battles you'll face before sunset. This is armor for your soul because the world is going to try to strip away everything these phrases represent. Within hours of declaring that you'll focus on what you can control, someone will cut you off in traffic, and your first instinct will be rage. Within minutes of promising to choose your response, a coworker will say something that triggers every insecurity you have. Before lunch, after committing to act with integrity, you'll face a situation where lying would be easier and more profitable than telling the truth. This is where the real work begins. This is where you discover whether you meant those words or just enjoyed the sound of them. Because every single person who has ever transformed their life has faced this moment, the moment when their principles collided with their circumstances, the moment when their values wrestled with their convenience, the moment when their commitment met their comfort zone and had to choose which one would survive. Let me tell you what happens when you really commit to focusing on what you can control. You become terrifying to people who make their living off drama. You stop feeding energy to gossip, complaints, and blame because you realize none of that serves your growth. You become immune to manipulation because manipulators need you to believe you're powerless, and you know exactly where your power lies. But here's the part nobody warns you about. When you stop reacting to things outside your control, some people will try harder to get a reaction. They'll escalate their behavior. They'll question your character. They'll call you cold or uncaring because your peace threatens their chaos. Your stability exposes their instability. Your focus highlights their scattered energy. And that makes them uncomfortable. This is the first test. Will you abandon your principles to make others comfortable? Will you sacrifice your peace to prove you care? Will you give away your power to show you're human? Because the moment you do, you teach everyone around you that your boundaries are negotiable and your strength is temporary. The person who passes this test becomes magnetic, not because they're perfect, but because they're consistent. People know they can depend on you because you don't change based on circumstances. You don't become someone different when things get difficult. You remain grounded when everyone else is spinning. You stay focused when others are scattered. You choose growth when others choose blame. When you truly commit to choosing your response, something profound happens. You realize that most of your suffering has been self-inflicted, not the events themselves, but your interpretation of those events. Not what happened to you, but what you decided it meant about you. Not the circumstances, but your story about the circumstances. This realization is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it means you have more control than you thought. Terrifying because it means you can't blame anyone else for your emotional state. You can't say someone made you angry. You chose, forced you to be bitter. You select anger. You can't claim circumstances' bitterness. You can't pretend that external events control your internal peace. You decide what disrupts your peace. But with this responsibility comes incredible power. The power to remain calm in chaos. The power to find opportunity in obstacle. The power to choose hope when everyone else chooses despair. The power to respond with wisdom when others react with emotion. The power to be the person others turn to when their world is falling apart because yours remains intact. When you really understand that your worth isn't determined by external outcomes, you become free to fail. And that freedom to fail is actually freedom to succeed beyond what you ever imagined possible. Because most people never reach their potential, not because they lack ability, but because they're terrified of looking foolish, being rejected, or failing publicly. But when your worth is internal and unshakable, failure becomes data instead of devastation. Rejection becomes redirection instead of destruction. Criticism becomes information instead of identity assassination. You can take risks others won't take because you know that your value as a human being doesn't depend on the outcome of those risks. This doesn't mean you become reckless. This means you become fearless. You can start that business because your worth doesn't depend on its success. You can write that book because your value doesn't hinge on whether it becomes a bestseller. You can have that difficult conversation because your identity doesn't require their approval. You can pursue that dream because your significance doesn't depend on achieving it perfectly. The person who separates their worth from their performance becomes unstoppable because they're no longer playing not to lose. They're playing to win. They're not trying to protect what little they have. They're trying to discover what they're capable of creating. They're not managing their image. They're building their character. And here's what happens when you truly embrace discomfort as your teacher. You start seeking challenge instead of avoiding it. You begin to understand that everything you want is on the other side of something you're currently avoiding. Every skill you admire in others was developed by doing things they initially didn't want to do. Every strength you wish you possessed was forged in situations that felt uncomfortable at the time. You realize that comfort is not your friend. Comfort is the slow death of potential. Comfort is the enemy of growth. Comfort is what keeps people stuck in lives they don't love, jobs they hate, relationships that drain them, and habits that limit them. But discomfort, difficulty, challenge, struggle, that's where transformation lives. When you see discomfort as training rather than torture, everything changes. That difficult conversation becomes practice in courage. That challenging project becomes development of competence. That uncomfortable situation becomes strengthening of character. That painful experience becomes deepening of wisdom. That scary decision becomes building of confidence. You stop running from the very experiences that could make you stronger, smarter, more capable, more resilient. You start running toward them. You become someone who doesn't just survive difficulty, but seeks it out, because you understand that difficulty is the price of growth, and growth is the price of a life worth living. When you commit to acting according to your values instead of your emotions, you join a rare group of people who can be trusted completely, because your behavior becomes predictable in the best possible way. People know that your kindness isn't dependent on your mood. Your integrity isn't subject to your convenience. Your commitment isn't conditional on your feelings. You become someone others stumble under pressure. You seek out during crises because they know you won't make decisions based on panic. You won't abandon your principles when following them becomes costly. You won't say things you don't mean or promise things you won't deliver. You become a lighthouse in the storm, steady and reliable when everything else is shaking. But this consistency requires something most people aren't willing to give. It requires you to act like the person you want to become, even when you don't feel like that person yet. It requires you to choose courage when you feel afraid, to choose patience when you feel frustrated, to choose forgiveness when you feel hurt, to choose growth when you feel comfortable. This is the hardest part of character development, living according to your values when your emotions are screaming for something else, speaking with kindness when someone has been cruel to you, responding with wisdom when your anger wants revenge, acting with integrity when compromise would be profitable, choosing truth when lies would be easier. Every time you choose values over emotions, you build something unbreakable inside yourself. You develop the kind of character that can withstand any storm because it's not dependent on external conditions. You become someone you can respect, someone you can trust, someone you can count on. And when you become that for yourself, you automatically become that for others. Living in the present moment transforms everything because it's where all your actual power exists. You can spend infinite mental energy replaying yesterday's mistakes, but you can't change a single one of them. You can invest unlimited worry in tomorrow's possibilities, but you can't control most. This choice, this action, this of them. But this moment, right now, this breath decision, that's where change happens. When you truly master presence, You stop living in the prison of past regrets and future anxieties. You stop missing your life while worrying about your life. You stop being so focused on getting somewhere else that you forget to engage with where you are. You become fully alive instead of partially present. This presence gives you superpowers that scattered attention can never develop. You notice opportunities others miss because they're mentally somewhere else. You make better decisions because you're operating from reality instead of from the stories your mind tells about reality. You have deeper conversations because you're actually listening instead of planning what you'll say next. You experience more joy because you're actually there when joyful moments arrive. But presence isn't passive. It's intensely active. It's the complete engagement of your attention with what's actually happening instead of what you think should be happening or what you're afraid might happen. It's the difference between experiencing your life and thinking about your life, between living your days and managing your days, between being present for your relationships and just being physically there. The person who masters the present moment becomes magnetic, because presence is rare. Most people are mentally somewhere else even when they're physically right in front of you. But when you're truly present, people feel it. They feel seen, heard, understood. They feel like they matter because you're giving them something precious and increasingly uncommon: your complete attention. When you accept complete responsibility for your thoughts, words, and actions, you reclaim power you didn't even realize you'd given away. Every excuse becomes an opportunity for growth. Every blame becomes a mirror showing you where you need to develop strength. Every complaint becomes a problem you can actually solve, instead of just something to suffer through. This level of responsibility is terrifying because it means you can't hide anymore. You can't pretend that your life is the way it is because of forces beyond your control. You can't blame your past, your circumstances, your genetics, your luck, or anyone else for where you are right now. But it's also exhilarating because it means you have more power to change your situation than you ever imagined. You didn't choose everything that happened to you, but you choose what you do with everything that happened to you. You didn't pick your starting point, but you pick your direction. You didn't select your challenges, but you select your response to them. You didn't determine your past, but you determine your future through the choices you make right now. This responsibility extends beyond just taking ownership of your mistakes. It includes taking credit for your strengths, acknowledging your progress, and recognizing your power to influence outcomes. It means understanding that you're not just responsible for cleaning up your messes, but for creating your successes. Not just for surviving your difficulties, but for thriving because of them. When you see obstacles as opportunities to practice virtue, you transform every challenge from a threat into training. Every difficult person becomes your patience coach. Every setback becomes your resilience teacher. Every failure becomes your wisdom instructor. Every betrayal becomes your discernment developer. Every loss becomes your priorities clarifier. This shift in perspective is revolutionary because it means nothing is wasted. Every experience, good or bad, becomes useful for your development. Every challenge becomes curriculum for becoming stronger. Every problem becomes practice for becoming wiser. Every difficulty becomes development of character. You stop being someone who life happens to and start being someone who uses life as raw material for transformation. But this requires you to see with different eyes. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is this here to teach me?" Instead of complaining, "This isn't fair," You wonder, how can this make me stronger? Instead of demanding, when will this end? You explore, how can I grow through this? These 10 phrases are your declaration of independence from mediocrity. They're your daily rebellion against weakness, your morning manifesto for an unstoppable life. Tomorrow when you wake up, before you let the world tell you who to be, speak these truths to yourself and watch as you transform from someone life happens to into someone who happens to life. Remember, warriors aren't born in comfort. They're forged in the fire of daily choice.